Dear viewers, welcome to our channel. Subscribe to receive more stories every day. The Christmas lights twinkled with an artificial cheer that Julia couldn't quite connect with. Her husband, Edward, had insisted on hosting Christmas dinner at his parents' sprawling estate. As the daughter of a single mother who'd struggled to make ends meet, Julia had learned to keep her head down and her heart strong. But tonight, surrounded by Edward's affluent family, her strength was being tested. The mansion was a glittering spectacle of wealth and indulgence, from the towering Christmas tree in the grand hall to the imported crystal glasses adorning the dining table. Julia had spent hours helping Edward prepare for the event, yet now, she felt like an outsider in a world she wasn't meant to belong to. Dinner began with pleasantries, but it wasn't long before Edward's sister, Veronica, made the first jab. "So, Julia," Veronica said, swirling her wine glass. "Remind me again what it is you do. Social work, was it? That must be fulfilling." Her tone dripped with condescension. Julia smiled politely, swallowing the sting. "Yes, I work with underprivileged families. It's incredibly rewarding." "Rewarding doesn't pay the bills, though, does it?" Edward's mother, Eleanor, chimed in. Her diamond necklace sparkled in the candlelight as she scrutinized Julia with a thin smile. "Edward works so hard to maintain this family's reputation. It must be exhausting for him to shoulder everything." Julia glanced at Edward, hoping for a word of support, but he focused on cutting his steak, avoiding her gaze. Her heart sank. "It's not about money," Julia replied calmly, though her hands clenched under the table. "It's about making a difference." Eleanor gave a dismissive laugh. "Oh, darling, the only difference you'll make is in the lives of people who can't help themselves. Let's be honest. Charity is for people who lack the ambition to succeed." Veronica snickered. Maybe she could start with herself. The laughter around the table burned Julia's ears. She looked at Edward again, silently begging him to speak up. But he remained silent, sipping his wine as if nothing was happening. In that moment, Julia felt a crack in the foundation of her marriage. If he couldn't defend her now, would he ever? The final blow came after dessert. As the family gathered by the fire for drinks, Eleanor turned to Julia with a sly smile. "We should talk about a prenuptial agreement," she said. "It's never too late to protect the family assets." Julia's cheeks burned with humiliation. She stood abruptly, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "Thank you for the lovely dinner, Eleanor, but I think I've had enough of your hospitality for one lifetime." The room fell silent. Julia turned to Edward, her voice trembling. "And thank you, Edward, for showing me exactly where I stand in your life." Without waiting for a response, she grabbed her coat and walked out into the frosty night. Snowflakes fell softly around her as she stood by the gate, letting the cold air sting her face. She had never felt so alone. Julia moved out of the penthouse she'd shared with Edward and into a modest apartment on the edge of town. The pain of their separation was sharp, but it was also freeing. For the first time in years, she wasn't trying to fit into a mold that wasn't hers. She threw herself into her work, taking on more cases and finding solace in the lives she was able to help. One evening after a long day, she returned home to find a thick envelope in her mailbox. Inside was a letter from an anonymous benefactor, along with a donation to her community center. The letter read, "For someone who truly cares, this is just the beginning." The words filled her with a renewed sense of purpose. She didn't know who had sent the money, but it came at the perfect time. Julia decided to expand her efforts, using the funds to launch new programs for struggling families. Little by little, her influence grew. But the letter wasn't the only surprise waiting for her. As she stood before a crowd at the grand opening of her first shelter, Julia noticed a familiar figure lurking at the back of the room. It was Edward. He looked out of place, his tailored suit a stark contrast to the modest surroundings. Julia's chest tightened. What was he doing here? Edward approached her after the ceremony, his expression unreadable. "You look different," he said awkwardly. "I feel different," she replied, her tone cool. "What do you want, Edward?" I heard about what you're doing, he said. It's impressive. I just wanted to say I'm proud of you. Julia didn't miss the hint of guilt in his voice. She gave a polite nod, but her mind was elsewhere. Edward's sudden appearance felt calculated, as if he were testing the waters for something more. As the weeks passed, Edward began appearing more frequently, offering help and suggesting reconciliation. Julia remained wary, her instincts warning her that his intentions weren't as noble as they seemed. Edward's reappearance in Julia's life felt like an unwelcome ghost from her past. While he played the part of a supportive ex, Julia sensed there was more to his intentions. His sudden interest in her work didn't align with the man who had sat silently as his family tore her apart. Despite her suspicions, Julia's life continued to flourish. The anonymous donation had been a turning point, allowing her to scale her efforts. She launched 3 more shelters in neighboring towns, providing not just housing but also counseling, job training, and childcare for struggling families. Her name began to circulate in local media as a rising force in social justice. But Edward wasn't the only one taking notice. One day, as Julia prepared for a television interview about her work, she received an unexpected message. It was an invitation to a high-profile Christmas gala hosted by the city's elite. The sender, Eleanor. Julia froze, the invitation trembling in her hands. The memory of that humiliating Christmas dinner flooded back, but this time, the sting was accompanied by a flicker of defiance. She had changed since that night. She was no longer the woman who could be silenced by their sneers. After a moment's thought, she slipped the invitation into her bag. This time she wouldn't be walking away. The gala was a dazzling display of wealth and status, held in the grand ballroom of the city's most luxurious hotel. Chandeliers sparkled overhead as servers glided through the room with trays of champagne. Julia entered alone, her tailored navy gown exuding quiet confidence. Heads turned as she walked past, her presence commanding attention. Eleanor was the first to approach her, arms outstretched in a feigned gesture of warmth. "Julia, my dear. How wonderful to see you again," she gushed, her sharp eyes scanning Julia's attire. "I must say, you've cleaned up nicely." Julia smiled politely, refusing to rise to the bait. "Thank you for the invitation, Eleanor. I was surprised to receive it." "Well, we couldn't ignore the wonderful things you've been doing for the community," Eleanor replied, her tone dripping with insincerity. It's rare to see someone from modest beginnings achieve so much. Before Julia could respond, Edward appeared by Eleanor's side. He looked nervous, as if he were caught between 2 opposing forces. "Julia," he said, his voice soft, "you look stunning." "Thank you, Edward." Her voice was calm, but her eyes held his, unflinching. "It's been a long time." As the night went on, Julia noticed whispers following her around the room. The wealthy guests, many of whom had ignored her at previous events, now approached her with guarded smiles. Some praised her work, while others probed for information about her growing influence. It was clear they saw her as a potential ally, or a threat. Julia's suspicions were confirmed when Veronica cornered her by the bar. "So," Veronica began, swirling her drink. "What's your secret, Julia? You've gone from being a nobody to a household name in less than 2 years." Julia raised an eyebrow. "Hard work and perseverance, Veronica. Perhaps you should try it sometime." Veronica's smile faltered, but before she could retort, Edward interrupted. "Julia, can we talk privately?" Julia hesitated, then nodded. He led her to a quiet balcony overlooking the city. The cold night air bit at her skin, but she refused to show any discomfort. "I need to be honest with you," Edward began, his hands gripping the railing. "Things haven't been going well for my family. My father's business is on the brink of collapse, and we need help." Julia's breath caught. "And you think I can help you?" she asked, her voice steady. Edward nodded, his expression desperate. "You've built something incredible, Julia. I was wrong to doubt you, and I want to make things right. Maybe we can start over together." Julia stared at him, a storm of emotions swirling within her. She had waited for years to hear him acknowledge his mistakes, but now the words felt hollow. His apology wasn't about her. It was about what she could do for him. "I appreciate your honesty, Edward," she said, her tone cool. "But I've already moved on." Before he could respond, a staff member approached Julia with a discreet nod. "Miss Julia, they're ready for your speech." Edward blinked in confusion. "Speech? What speech?" Julia smiled faintly. "You'll see." The ballroom quieted as Julia took the stage. The guests watched with curiosity, their glasses of champagne forgotten. Edward and his family stood near the front, their expressions a mix of confusion and unease. "Good evening," Julia began, her voice clear and confident. "I want to thank you all for inviting me here tonight. When I first stepped into this world, I was told I didn't belong. But I've learned that belonging isn't about wealth or status. It's about what you contribute to the world." She paused, letting the words sink in. "Many of you know me as the founder of the Harmony Initiative, a network of shelters and programs for struggling families. What you may not know is how it all started." Julia reached into her clutch and pulled out the letter she had received months earlier. "This letter came to me when I was at my lowest. It was an anonymous donation that allowed me to take my first steps toward creating something meaningful." The crowd murmured, intrigued. Julia unfolded the letter and read the closing line. "For someone who truly cares, this is just the beginning." She looked up, her gaze locking onto Eleanor's. "I've since discovered that this letter came from a member of this very room, a person who saw potential where others saw failure." Eleanor's face paled as Julia continued. "To that person I want to say thank you. You believed in me when no one else did. And to everyone else, I hope this serves as a reminder that kindness has the power to change lives." The room erupted in applause, but Julia's focus remained on Eleanor, whose hands trembled as she clutched her champagne flute. The truth hung in the air, unspoken but undeniable. Julia descended from the stage, her head held high. As she passed Edward, she leaned in and whispered, "If you truly want to make things right, start by listening to the people you've ignored." The night of the gala had left an indelible mark on everyone who attended, but none felt it more acutely than Eleanor. Julia's speech had not only spotlighted her quiet act of generosity, but also forced her to confront the uncomfortable truth about her past actions. 4 days after the event, Eleanor avoided calls from friends and family, her mind racing with memories of the Christmas dinner where she had humiliated Julia. The very person she had belittled for her lack of ambition had turned her kindness into something extraordinary, far beyond what Eleanor had ever imagined. But her pride kept her silent, unwilling to admit that Julia's success was a rebuke to everything she had stood for. Meanwhile, Edward grew increasingly desperate. The family's financial troubles were dire. His father's business teetered on the edge of collapse, and creditors were circling like vultures. Edward had always relied on his charm and connections to navigate life, but now, doors were closing faster than he could knock on them. In a last-ditch effort, Edward reached out to Julia again. This time, he arrived at one of her shelters unannounced. The building buzzed with activity. Children playing in the recreation room, volunteers sorting donations, and a line of families waiting for assistance. Edward couldn't help but feel out of place amid the warmth and hope radiating from every corner. Julia spotted him immediately. Her expression didn't betray surprise, but there was no trace of warmth either. She approached him with the same calm authority she used with everyone else in the room. "What are you doing here, Edward?" she asked, her tone measured. "I wanted to talk," he said, his voice tight. "I need your help." Julia crossed her arms. "We already had this conversation. What more is there to say?" Edward hesitated, his pride warring with his desperation. Finally he blurted out, "The family business is failing. We need an investor. You have the resources to save us." For a moment Julia stared at him, her expression unreadable. Then she shook her head slowly. "Do you hear yourself, Edward? You didn't come here to apologize or make amends. You came here to ask for money." "It's not just about the money," he protested. "I want to fix things between us." Julia's laugh was cold and sharp. "Fix things? You stood by while your family tore me down, and now you expect me to fix your problems? No, Edward. I've already spent enough of my life cleaning up after your messes." Her words hit him like a slap, but before he could respond, Julia's assistant approached, whispering something in her ear. Julia nodded and turned back to Edward. "If you'll excuse me, I have real problems to solve." Edward left the shelter with a heavy heart, but his determination remained. He wasn't ready to give up. 2 weeks later, Julia received a formal invitation to a meeting with Edward's family. The letter was written in Eleanor's hand, its tone surprisingly conciliatory. Against her better judgment, Julia decided to attend, curious to see what they wanted. The meeting was held at the family's once proud estate, now showing signs of neglect. Julia entered the grand dining room, where Eleanor, Edward, and Veronica waited, their faces drawn and weary. Despite their attempts at civility, the tension in the room was palpable. Eleanor spoke first. "Julia, thank you for coming. I know we haven't always seen eye to eye, but we need your help." Julia raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." Eleanor sighed. "The family business is failing. We've lost most of our assets, and without an investor, we'll have to declare bankruptcy. Edward suggested that you might consider stepping in." Julia let the silence stretch, watching their discomfort grow. Finally she said, "And why would I do that?" Veronica bristled. "Because it's the right thing to do. You wouldn't have gotten where you are without." "Without what, Veronica?" Julia interrupted, her voice like steel. "Without being humiliated at your Christmas dinner. Without being abandoned by Edward when I needed him most. Let me remind you, I built my success despite you, not because of you." Eleanor flinched but kept her composure. "You're right," she said quietly. "We were wrong to treat you the way we did. And I was wrong to judge you. But this isn't about us. It's about saving the livelihoods of the people who depend on this company." Julia studied Eleanor's face, searching for signs of sincerity. Finally, she stood and placed a folder on the table. "This is a proposal," she said. "I've been working with a group of investors to acquire companies with untapped potential. Your business will be absorbed into the Harmony Initiative, restructured under my leadership." Edward's eyes widened. "You mean you'd take over?" "Yes," Julia replied. "On one condition. None of you will have any role in the company moving forward." Eleanor's lips tightened, but she nodded. "Agreed." Edward looked like he wanted to protest, but a sharp glance from Eleanor silenced him. Julia took the folder and turned to leave. At the door she paused and looked back. "Merry Christmas, Eleanor. I hope you find the peace you've been searching for." Months later, the Harmony Initiative officially acquired Edward's family business. Julia transformed the struggling company into a sustainable venture, creating jobs and opportunities for countless families. The story of her rise became an inspiration, featured in newspapers and television interviews. At the next Christmas gala, Julia stood before a packed room once again. This time, she was introduced not just as a philanthropist but as one of the city's most influential leaders. She spoke of resilience, of finding strength in adversity, and of the importance of kindness. After the speech, a woman approached her, tears in her eyes. "You've changed so many lives," the woman said. "Including mine." Julia smiled, her heart full. She had come a long way from the timid woman who had walked out into the snow that fateful Christmas night. Now she was a force to be reckoned with, a silent savior who had found her voice. Dear viewers, thank you for watching. If you like this story, please subscribe to our channel to receive more stories every day. Share with us what you think of this story and tell us where you're watching from.